Welcome to the Livestream at First Unitarian Wilmington podcast. Here we will share some sermons, talks, interviews, or conversations we call life journeys, and also occasionally music. I'm Reverend Larry Piers, minister at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. If you enjoy what we are offering, please share it with a friend. Our purpose is to spark conversations and to share what we value as a Unitarian Universalist congregation with a wider community. To find out more about us, please visit our website, firstuuwilm.org. And now, welcome to this episode of Livestream at First Unitarian. So, Unitarian Universalist congregations, at our last General Assembly in June 2024, settled on this statement that we'll see on the screen in a moment to define our commitment to religious pluralism. Direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder are primary sources of Unitarian Universalist inspiration. These experiences open our hearts, renew our spirits, and transform our lives. Draw upon and are inspired by sacred, secular, and scientific understandings that help us make meaning and live into our values. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. We respect the history, the context, and the cultures in which these sources were created and are currently practiced. Grateful for the experiences that move us, aware of the religious ancestries we inherit, and enlivened by the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. This is a commitment in contemporary Unitarian Universalism to a religious pluralism. This articulation is helpful for newcomers in our midst who can now understand some of the various sources that we call upon in our worship, in our music, in our educational programs. It's helpful even for longer-term members to be reminded that contemporary Unitarian Universalism is intentionally drawing from various sources in the hymns that we sing, the readings that we use, and the topics we explore. This time of year, we have the opportunity to draw inspiration from the spring festivals of Passover and Easter. Today, we focus on Passover. Next week, we'll focus on Easter. And because Earth Day is so close, we're going to have an Earthrise celebration in which we focus both on Easter and our commitment to the earth. I like to explain, as many religious scholars do today, that the stories, the texts that we draw from, are written in the styles of our ancestors to convey meaning, not facts. They are meant to capture universal yearnings and to stir our imaginations into new ways of action. I've often said I like to read these stories or these texts as if they were dreams, letting the images and the stories convey whatever particular interpretation my own life and that story might reveal to me in the moment. Robert Alter, a professor of Hebrew and comparative literature, who also has translated several of the Hebrew texts, points out that, quote, the religious tradition has by and large encouraged us to take the Bible seriously rather than enjoy it. Alter says that when we can enjoy the stories as stories, paradoxically, we can see more in the stories and find more personal truth. What I've appreciated about Judaism is that for a long time, it has been part of that tradition to offer multiple perspectives, multiple rereadings of the same text. It's an approach to religious stories that provoke argument, that embody a kind of a playful engagement, and elicits more questions than answers. There's a familiar Jewish joke that describes a man that went to his rabbi and asked her why the rabbi always answers the man's questions with another question. The rabbi replies, "Why not?" In the Night of Questions, a Reconstructionist Jewish Haggadah for Passover, the authors provide the answers to the question, is this story true? The authors respond in this way to that Exodus story. I quote, "In our time, most of us tell the Seder tale as sacred story rather than historical record. We are skeptical of miracles. We are troubled by the moral implications of plague and punishment. We seek a God commensurate with our enlarged vision of the liberation of all peoples." Is the story true? They continue, "No. Not if we mean an accurate account of events that happened more or less the way they are told. But our ancestors did not write history. They wrote of their experience of a power greater than themselves that stood for freedom from oppression. We do not tell the story of the Exodus because it is historically accurate. We tell the story because it is our story, and we need to recover and uncover the eternal ideas that this story conveys." I believe that we tell and retell stories like this again and again to see what the story might disclose to us at this time in our life, at this moment in our history. In the Jewish tradition, the Exodus story is told at Passover not just as what happened, but also as what is happening right now. It is a particular founding story of a people, but it's also a universal story that any one of us can draw insight and inspiration. The Passover story contains within it metaphors that point to universal human experiences. For example, when the Exodus text says that the Jews had to escape Egypt, the word Egypt, Mitzrayim, is related to the Hebrew word for narrows, mitzar. Hasidic masters pointed out that the Hebrew word for Egypt, Mitzrayim, can also be understood as the narrow place of consciousness. In other words, just as the Israelites leaving Egypt had to get through the narrow place, Egypt, and a narrow place that constricted their own consciousness on who they were and who they could become, so also any of us, sometimes in our own life, have to move through the constraints, whatever constrains us. Even if it's just our narrow thinking, if we're going to embark on a journey of personal change, or together on a journey of collective resistance. Often what inhibits us is our conflictual relationship with the unknown. The psychotherapist and Jewish spiritual director Estelle Frankel, in her engaging book, The Wisdom of Not Knowing, I just grabbed that book off the shelf. I said, I must know something about this, or I have to know something. The Wisdom of Not Knowing explores this theme of unknowing in ways that I think are relevant for us, any of us. She declares up front, see if this resonates with you. For most of us, the unknown is both friend and foe. At times, it is a source of vitality and growth and adventure. And at other times, it spells danger, fear, or paralyzing anxiety. Is it fitting at all for you? Our psychological, our emotional, our spiritual health, she writes, are radically influenced by how comfortable we are with navigating the unknown and uncertain dimensions of our lives. I can't imagine what it must have been like for the Israelites to pack up in the middle of the night, to leave the unknown and to leave the known and the familiar behind on just a promise from Moses or from God that it will get better. That must have taken a certain kind of relationship with the unknown. They were hardly halfway down the road, as you may recall, when Pharaoh's army started to chase them. Here's where, for me, according to one telling of the story, one character, Nachshon, arises that I feel holds great meaning for us in our personal and collective lives at this time. So, as I continue with my reflections, maybe you want to think about a particular question that you're holding at this moment in your own life, one that beckons a response from you, one that's tapping you on the shoulder or whispering to you in the early hours of the morning. Got something? So there's one midrash or commentary on the story that says, as the Israelites stood at that edge of the unknown on the shore of the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, the people rebelled at the sea and refused to cross. Tradition has it that someone named Nachshon simply leapt into the waves of the sea. He took bold steps beyond fear, beyond uncertainty, even filled with his fear, filled with his uncertainty. He waded in feet first. As the story goes, it wasn't until Nachshon took the first step that the waters even parted. It wasn't until someone in this version of the story took the first step that the waters even begin to part. There's a lesson in here for us in the uncertain and uncanny times in which we live. Paralyzed by fear and overwhelm, someone, still someone, has to tiptoe into the unknown before the way becomes clear. We need to take steps towards the world that we want, decide on what is ours to do, rather than be complicit with what is. Otherwise, we remain defined by the conditions set by those who are in power. Am I making sense to you here? The character, Nachshon, reminds us to not wait until all the reluctance we might have dissipates, but with our reluctance, with our fear, with our uncertainty, jump into the unfamiliar, into the unknown. And then and only then can we begin to discover the waters of possibility. There's a lesson. There's a lesson in this story for us. Is there? Yes? No? Of course, we can't always wait until the conditions are right. We can't always wait until the uncertainty dissipates before we tiptoe into the uncertainty and begin a journey of personal change on the individual front, or before we take a journey of bold resistance on the collective front. For me, that's the wisdom of this character of Nachshon, that Nachshon offers us this morning for this time, for this Passover, for this year. Even after taking the first step, even after the waters seemed to part miraculously or the tide lowered just in time to create a passage on the other side, still our personal or collective liberation is not a one and done action. No, the process of personal and collective liberation can only be claimed moment by moment by moment. And we can remind each other that in each moment we can choose to move with our reluctance, move with our uncertainty, and take a first step with others alongside of us or soon to follow, we hope. For as the story goes, even well on their journey, the Israelites yearn to go back to the known. They yearn to go back to Egypt. As Frankel narrates the story from the book of Numbers, she says, they were often nostalgic for the good, old, bad days in Egypt. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt, also the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. They complained to Moses that he brought them out of the desert to starve. Even with the miracle of the manna that was provided them each day, it may have satisfied their hunger, she says, but not their hunger for security. They missed the predictability, the sense of control that they might have felt in Egypt, where everything was known. Though in actuality, they were oppressed and enslaved by the Egyptians. The Israelites look back on their time in Egypt with nostalgia because they could not bear the uncertainty that they faced as a people. So the key here is, what is our own relationship with the unknown, with uncertainty? How can we manage that uncertainty in such a way that in spite of what's not known, we can still take steps forward? Our religious traditions encourage us to keep being awake, keep awakening rather than nodding off within the known and the familiar, to appreciate the wonder of what is rather than take everything for granted. We need to cultivate that wisdom of unknowing as a source of wonder within ourselves and among ourselves. Otherwise, as Frankel says, it's hard to leave the safe harbor of the known to the unpredictable sea of change. Now, there are problems, theological problems, that any of us might have with the story that seems to convey with certainty that redemption will come through on high, from someone on high or outside of ourselves. I think that Nachshon gives us the message that we must participate with whatever power exists to bring liberation about. One rabbi, Arnold Eisen, in a recent book, offers this perspective. As the world lurches from crisis to crisis, I hope that we will not allow doubt or disbelief concerning God's redemptive activity or the redemptive power of love to interfere with our work on behalf of redemption. One can test both belief and action in the midst of the commitment, just as we learn about loving from loving, about friendship from being a friend. Debate the meaning of Passover Seder, argue about the meaning of matzah and bitter herbs, but be sure to feed the hungry, and do it now, he writes. At a time that we are seeing unspeakable cruelty being carried out by a government that aims to and has already started to depart hundreds of people, we can lose faith in the redemptive power of love or our capacity to influence and to impact what is happening. It's true that this relentless, dizzying actions of our government seem to mean that cruelty has the last word and will win. Yet I believe that character, Nachshon, who takes bold steps in spite of what's unknown, what's unpredictable, can be a guide for us. Just this week, I talked to one of my friends who's also a minister colleague, and she had talked to her young daughter who's a freshman in college. The daughter told her at their university that 10 students were deported, and their student visas were revoked for no apparent reason. My friend said that her daughter said that's all they're talking about right now. Imagine that precious time in life, having these kinds of experiences, these heart-wrenching experiences of unsafety and terror happening around you. Her daughter, who I know is an undoubtedly very talented and smart young woman, fears that her degree and education might not continue because it was so dependent upon government funds. What we seem to think of sometimes as political actions actually have real life implications on people that we don't know, and more people that we do know. So as I reflected upon this Passover story this year, I saw another embodiment of that Nachshon spirit in the story of Miriam. The story is this one line in the sacred text. Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her in dance and timbrels. This caused me to wonder, where did all the women acquire their tambourines and their drums? If they were fleeing from their enemies, surely they had little time to pack their bags and also begin to cook the unleavened bread that they would need for the journey. Surely, given their dire circumstances in confronting Pharaoh's Egypt and their own predicament, how could they have imagined that they would need tambourines and drums? How could they imagine that they would absolutely be celebrating the next day? Yet Miriam, we imagine, saw something others could not see. She saw the opportunity for true liberation, not waiting until all the conditions were right before taking the first move or packing your tambourine. Not waiting till everything was settled before taking her first step. She encouraged the people of Israel to lift up their eyes and their spirits and prepare to sing and to dance no matter what. Likewise, there's wisdom in this story for our time to take the first step, any step that declares our power, a power for liberation and change. So, let's pack our tambourines. Let's prepare to celebrate the victory if we move towards that which we know should be happening rather than waiting for it all to happen before we move. So may it be. Amen.